It was heavy on optics, but was it light on outcomes? President Donald Trump hailed his visit to China an historic moment. It certainly appears to have thawed diplomatic tensions, but with no movement on Iran, uncertainty around Taiwan, and a lack of headline-grabbing trade deals, just what was achieved? We'll debate the latest on Counterpoints with me, Melinda Nusafora. When you consider President Trump and his MAGA allies have made political sport out of demonising China, this recent state visit was a relationship reset.
This has been an incredible visit. I think a lot of good has come of it. We've made some fantastic trade deals, great for both countries. He's a man I respect greatly.
Between praising the size of China's roses and the friendly photo ops, the US announced a smattering of deals, particularly in the agriculture and aviation sectors. But nothing like the $250 billion commercial signing ceremony that marked Trump's 2017 Beijing trip. Is it a sign that China doesn't need the US as much as the US needs China? Two other agenda items left undetermined were Taiwan and Iran. The president still won't be drawn on whether he'll approve the latest arms deal with Taipei and says the US doesn't need China's help to end the Iran war.
Mr. President, did President Xi make any firm commitment to put pressure on the Iranians to reopen the Strait of Hormuz?
I'm not asking for any favors. Because when you ask for favors, you have to do favors in return. We don't need favors.
Hot on Trump's heels, Russia's Vladimir Putin is now taking centre stage in the Chinese capital. Is the timing a coincidence? Coming up, we'll debate if the smiling state visit indicates stronger, more balanced relations or a weaker US looking to mend fences. Why President Trump didn't push China on Iran, and if President Xi is cementing his position as a stable alternate global leader. Joining the discussion is Kian Tajbakhsh, Iranian-American scholar and professor of international relations at New York University. Carla Sands is back with us, Vice President for Energy and Environment at the America First Policy Institute. And rounding out our panel on Counterpoints, Sean Ryan, founder of the China Market Research Group. To all of you, welcome to Counterpoints. Well, Donald Trump and many MAGA Republicans have long made rivalry with China a cornerstone of their economic rhetoric, accusing China at times of ripping off the US and stealing manufacturing jobs. But there was no evidence of that previous animosity during this current President Trump's two-day visit to Beijing. Both leaders were all smiles and they hailed progress on various diplomatic portfolios. President Trump talked up the fantastic trade deals that were secured, although many observers weren't overly impressed with the outcomes. Carla, this visit has, on the surface at least, appeared to demonstrate a reset in relations. Does it indicate stronger, more balanced relations, or a weaker US looking to mend fences with a newly stronger China?
Well, it's a fair question, and we could see that on the surface, things looked very pleasant. But as a matter of fact, Chairman Xi did raise the talk of diminishing U.S. He did raise Taiwan with President Trump. And, you know, they had private talks that were not for public consumption. And so I would say President Trump is great at diplomacy. He's probably the best ever president, making friends with every world leader. But the fact is, there are tensions. But we want to have a good relationship with every country, excuse me, and we want to have great trade with every country. And that's really the secret sauce for all of our shared prosperity. So I think President Trump was mission accomplished to get more planes ordered by China, to get some more exports for our American farmers, and to raise things like human rights issues and pastors that are being held by the communist government, as well as Jimmy Lai.
Sean, was this a successful US mission? Was it mission accomplished for President Trump, or was it an indication that the US is looking to reset relations because it needs China more than China needs it?
Yeah, it doesn't look like this was mission accomplished for the United States, and it's scary whenever someone uses George Bush's terms. I think Carla wants to be appointed back into the Trump administration because quite clearly China has the upper hand in the relationship economically between the U.S. right now, and that has happened only since Trump has come back because Trump is not good at dealing with other world leaders. He's started causing tension, not just with China in 2017 by launching the trade war, but also with our historical allies like Canada, like the UK, like France. None of our historical allies are supporting Trump in the United States right now and Iran. And that's why China right now has the upper hand in the trade war. So for instance, before the trade war, China was buying $300 billion a year of semiconductors from America. That's not happening right now because of Trump's export controls. Even during the Biden regime, China was buying $30 billion worth of agricultural products a year. Now that number dropped to $8.5 billion in 2025. And Trump is saying, this is great. We're getting the number to only $17 billion with soybeans because China's buying soybeans from Brazil and Argentina, buying beef from Australia. So what's happened is because of Trump, China is de-risked from the United States. Instead of buying American products, they're now buying elsewhere. And one key point, as Carla said, China's buying Boeing airplanes. They've only supposedly pledged to buy 200 Boeings, which would be the first time China bought Boeing airplanes in almost a decade. Last year alone, they bought 350 Airbus jets. So the trade war has completely been a failure for the United States, has hurt our ability to make money, and just increased tension. So respectfully, I disagree with Carla there.
Kian, before I bring you in, Carla, do you want to jump in on that and have a response?
I would love to.
Go ahead.
I would love to. So the Chinese Communist Party does reward countries that kowtow to the party. Australia has China as their biggest trading partner. The US, China's not even one of our largest trading partners. Our biggest trading bloc is with the EU. And then we have other countries individually. And the Chinese Communist Party is attempting to replace the US farm products with farm products from countries like Brazil, who are easier to control because they're just not as powerful. The United States is actually the most powerful it's been probably in my lifetime because we have a strong leader in President Trump. Our economy is growing very quickly right now. And I know it's a little blip with this Iran war with the cost of energy, but companies are reindustrializing. It's really exciting to see us regain our footing as a maker, not just a country that does sort of soft production. We have to make steel, aluminum, refine our own rare earth elements. We have to make our own pharmaceuticals and precursors. We have to be self-sufficient in order to be secure. And President Trump is moving us in that direction because of his leadership of putting America first.
Kian, do you agree with Carla? Do you think that China views America today as the strongest it's ever been?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on again. It's great to be with you and my fellow panelists. Look, from a geopolitical perspective, the question of how the summit ended and whether that shows and what it shows, I would make two distinctions and discuss these in terms of two dimensions. Mm-hmm. One is short-term and long-term economics, and the other is local and global geopolitics. Let me take the first one. I'm not going to I don't have the expertise that my fellow panelists have on specific trade issues at the moment. But the reality is that two things are happening. One is that China and the US are delinking. I mean, they are de-risking, let us say, but that is going in the direction of delinking. And that's a geopolitical decision. Just as Carla mentioned, the result of the COVID wake-up call for the US was that it was very hard to have supply chains in the West dependent on a geopolitical adversary. And it's not only the US that wants to de-risk, it's China also. So there is this kind of mutual delinking. So that is a long-term trend that we're going to have to keep in mind, irrespective of what happens in the medium term. The other thing about the economics, remember, is that China depends on the United States for its economic growth more than the U.S. depends on China. The U.S. is the biggest market for Chinese exports, and it needs to have access to that market. And so I think that is one dimension I keep in mind. Now, let me just go to the geopolitics. I think that all the smiles and the, let us say, muted response. I mean, there were no fireworks. There was no great breakthrough. There was no great animosity at the end of the summit. And I think that shows two things. One is that the China and the U.S. Agree that their economic relationship over the long term is paramount, and that Iran is a minor secondary issue to be managed and contained. So I think that that's why we didn't hear a lot about that. I think that, China, President Trump was reported to ask the Chinese premier for support on Iran. I doubt, whatever they said, I doubt China would actually give any support, because the reality is that over the last 30 years, and particularly since the 30-year or 25-year agreement that China had with Iran, China has been investing very, very heavily, not only in investing in Iranian physical infrastructure, but much more important, China has been deeply now integrated in Iran's surveillance and digital infrastructure, and the Iran war is clearly one attempt by the U.S. to push back against Chinese influence in the Middle East on Iran and the Houthis. If you remember, China was giving satellite imagery to the Houthis to target ships. So I think that this is the big geopolitical picture. And I think that China is basically waiting to see what happens with this war.
I'm going to put a pin in in Iran just for a moment, because we're going to come to that in greater depth as we move through in this debate. So I just want you all to hold a thought there of what Kian has said. I'm going to hand it back to you firstly, Sean, though, to pick up on what both Carla and Kian have said, that China depends on the US more than the US depends on China. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I think it's 2026. It's not 2016. So my fellow panelists are using outdated information and numbers. So if we're talking 10 years ago, they would have been right. But here's the thing. In 2017, 17% of China's exports went to the United States. That number is down to only about 11%. A full 18% now goes to ASEAN. So here's the thing. Over the last 10 years, Western Europe and the United States have said we need to de-risk from China. But the reality is they really haven't. China has de-risked from the United States by then forging strong trade relations with the Middle East, Africa, Latin America. And that's why Trump has come up with the Donroe Doctrine. That's why Trump is threatening China in the global South right now, because China's gotten so strong as the largest trade partner of about 140 countries around the world. That number was only about 40 10 years ago. But here's the thing. America likes to say that they've de-risked from China, and it makes great sound bites for politicians, but the reality isn't there. Let's look at some of the leverage that China has over the United States. Now, people have talked about rare earths. China right now refines about 90% of rare earths. It's actually fairly easy to find rare earths. You can get it in Greenland, you can get it in Brazil, you can get it in Ukraine, which is why Trump and some of his lackeys have tried to control Greenland. The difficulty is not getting access to rare earths, it's refining them. And China's probably got a 10-year lead minimum on refining capabilities. But it's not just rare earths, it's also ferrochrome and chrome ore, it's copper, it's nickel, it's tungsten. China has the refining capabilities that the United States simply doesn't have. And then it's also antibiotics and ibuprofen. 95% of antibiotics comes through India and China at some point, and China makes almost 100% of ibuprofen and paracetamol. So China has all of the upper hand in the trade war with the United States. So Scotty Bessent said China had deuces. He said that China relies on the United States for their economic growth. Again, this is 2026. It's not 2016. Only 2.5% of China's economy is based off of exports to the United States. Now, both countries in a rational, sane world would say we need each other. Economic trade between both countries clearly benefits the United States, and it obviously benefits China. So China wants to have good relations with the United States, but they have de-risked because they're worried about warmongers, xenophobes, and imperialists from the U.S. trying to contain and destabilize the CPC.
Carla?
Yeah, well, I completely disagree personally, and all political views are my own, but I do believe that China wrote a paper about 10 years ago and it said made in China 2025. And they were working to dominate in the sort of high tech and technical manufacturing world. Absolutely wanted to dominate it internally and then export to the rest of the world. Just one example where they have a plan. The Chinese government is certainly very strategic in how they make long-term plans and then they execute them fairly well. We are working as fast as we can to get that onshore refining because there's no question the rare earth elements are essential for our day-to-day manufacturing, but also for our defense industry. And as we look at President Trump's view of the world, he's really looking to realign the world to make it safer for the American people and our allies. And he's made efforts in Venezuela where he's removed the leadership there that was basically running a narco trafficking state, heavily influenced by Iran, the Mullah regime, and China and Russia. And he's getting that in a better place. We're now taking that oil and refining it like we did about 10 years ago. And most of that energy was going to China at discounted rates because Venezuela was sanctioned. Same thing with Iran. 90% of the energy was going to China at discounted rates. Well, that's now as we reorganize Iran and Iran behaves like a normal country, which is the goal. China will not be able to buy energy at discounted rates. It'll have to buy it at market rates. And we're about to start selling, it sounds like, some of our American energy to China, which is wonderful. We already sell our coal to China. China today is the only country in the world that is really growing like this in its energy. It's increasing. It's building about 38 nuclear power plants right now, about 30 new coal-fired plants, and they import all kinds of energy. And it's important because if you want to be a great industrial country with industrial might, you have to have enough energy. And certainly China, the Chinese leadership understands that and is determined to have baseload power, where the US and Europe, we're kind of bumping along with a flat line almost of energy in spite of President Trump's work to get our energy growing. And so that is the biggest effort, I would say, in his administration, is increase American energy, sell it to our friends, but also increase our industry so that we are a great power. And if there is a conflict, we're prepared.
Mm-hmm.
Could I just jump in here and just say, I was just looking up my notes, and as I say, I'm willing to be corrected, but based on a report from the Council on Foreign Relations on U.S.-China trade relationship, just a few days ago, the headline is China is one of the largest export markets for the U.S. goods and services, and the United States is the top export market for China. And so that was, I was basing my remarks on that, based on this report. And I think that, as I say, to build off the previous comments, I mean, I think it's true there is diversification happening, and what the U.S. and China clearly see, I think, is that that the future of the world, and I look at the relationship more from a geopolitical point of view, is they understand that the future of our planet and our world and our geopolitical stability does depend on a cooperative relationship between China and the United States as much as possible. And so I think both countries are trying to find a way to have a thinner but more cooperative relationship. Essentially, strengthening the globalization element, the trade and the economic element. That's the point that I was just trying to make.
Well, you talk about it, it depends on cooperation. So that is a little bit of give and take, a little bit of a strategic balance. And Taiwan has always been that complex diplomatic balancing act for the United States. President Trump, upon his return, described the delayed weapons sale to Taipei as a very good negotiating chip for Washington. Carla, is the US using Taiwan as a bargaining tool in its other sort of strategic discussions with China?
Well, certainly we love the people of Taiwan as we do the people of China. There's no question. And the chips that Taiwan makes are essential to every country's modern capabilities. But President Trump has encouraged Taiwan to bring that IP to the US and manufacture here in the United States because it is more secure.
Do you think if they don't, the US, President Trump would withdraw his support? Is this just another example of Taiwan being used as a bargaining tool?
Well, President Trump is the world's greatest diplomat, I think. I mean, he wrote the book, The Art of the Deal. So he's not going to take anything off the table. At the same time, he's very fair-minded. He doesn't turn on his friends. He brings his friends in closer. And so I think that
Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert,
well,
he turns on anyone who's close to him.
Sorry, but you don't know what conversations were had that were not for public consumption. And we never know that between world leaders.
I mean, it's literally anybody who gets close to Trump gets into trouble politically afterwards.
Well, so we don't need to divert
That's why you're
into
doing to the party line very well. I wonder if you live in China or if you live in the United States right now.
Well, I'm not going to talk while you're talking over me, so go ahead.
Finish up your point there, Carla, and then I'll throw it over to Sean.
Terrific. So what I'm saying is that the key important facts are that President Trump wants the American people to be secure and prosperous, and he wants to share that security and prosperity with our friends. That's why he wrote in the National Security Strategy back in November of last year, begging Europe, please have good policies, come back and join us, re-embrace your culture, protect your laws, protect your borders, control your immigration, have sensible energy policy. The fact that they're letting their cultures go and committing civilizational suicide, I believe was a term, is very concerning because we need our greatest friends where the United States, where our ancestors came from, most of us, was from Europe and the UK. And so it's also where our laws came from, our religion, our culture. And so President Trump is looking at the world from the 3,000 or 30,000 foot level and saying, how do we make sure that we're secure? So he's not letting the problems go that former presidents did. For instance, other presidents let Venezuela sit there and become very, very dangerous, exporting Hezbollah training camps. or he let Iran fester, other presidents, for 47 years. President Trump is saying, not on my watch. I'm going to take care of this. It may not be popular. It's the right thing to do. So I do believe he is guided by a strong North Star.
Okay. Sean, what do you make of it? Is Taiwan being used as a little bit of a chess piece pawn?
I'm not really sure how to respond to Carla. Maybe it's my audio, but I thought she said that Venezuela is exporting Hezbollah and was talking a lot about the true Americans are coming from Western Europe. I guess my family, who's Chinese and Jewish, doesn't count as true Americans, even though we've been in the U.S. for 200 years. But it's very clear that Taiwan is being used as a bargaining chip by Trump. He's not looking at it as an ideological basis, which is actually why the Chinese prefer dealing with Trump. He's actually reasonably popular in China rather than Biden, because the feeling with Biden was you were dealing with, a liberal democracy versus evil communist authoritarian fight. It was an ideological battle of Western imperialism. But clearly, Trump is a lot more transactional. So Biden had said several times that he would support Taiwan militarily if Taiwan ever declared independence. Well, Trump has said, we'll sell weapons to Taiwan, but they're not close partners in the same way that it was under previous administrations. The United States did sell $25 billion worth of military weapons to Taiwan last week, but that's down from the $40 billion that President Lai of Taiwan originally wanted. And that's because the KMT, the opposition party, voted against Taiwan buying a lot of arms from the United States. And here's the thing. Relations between Taiwan's KMT, again, the opposition party, and the CPC in China are probably the best in the 29 years that I lived in China. The chairwoman, Chang, of the KMT actually visited China recently, spent a week traveling around, was treated like a hero, met with Chairman Xi himself, and afterwards reiterated the one China policy. So I'm not particularly worried about tension in Taiwan unless the United States tries to turn Taiwan into a proxy war like they did with Ukraine, trying to sort of put Russia into morass, or unless Trump, moves in order to take the chips. But I don't think that's going to happen. I'm actually not concerned that in the next 3 to 4 years that there will be armed conflict in Taiwan. But we have to really understand, what is a true American? Is it me, my family, who's Chinese, who worked on the San Francisco gold mines for 200 years? Or is it just some, let's be honest, Caucasian white people who came from England, 100 years ago, or, from where Carla used to be the ambassador in Denmark? I think it's very dangerous to sort of define what a true American is based off of racial heritage.
Okay.
If I may, just really briefly, if I may just respond.
Yeah, Kian, let's just let Carla directly respond, and then Kian, I'll hand it over to you.
So our founders actually were from the UK and Europe, or from Great Britain and Europe. That's a fact. And then secondly, there were Hezbollah or training camps in Venezuela, and they were exporting them to the countries nearby. And so that was part of Iran festering in the Western Hemisphere, just right near the United States and South America. And then lastly, President Trump continues the American policy of strategic ambiguity regarding Taiwan, and that is our official position.
Okay, Kian, a quick pickup from you, and then I'm going to move us on specifically to Iran.
Right. What I wanted to say, I wanted to pick up on the question of Taiwan, and I think that because there was a mention about, and I think we can talk about it later about Iran, because I think the question of Iran is really could be seen as a proxy war currently between the United States and China. But in terms of, it was referred to before about how in the most recent 2025 national security strategy, the Trump administration has focused, and many people have said this, has focused on the Western Hemisphere, the Don Roque doctrine as the preeminent a focus of the strategy. I don't read it that way. Actually, if you look at the section on China, if you look at the section on Taiwan, it is very, very strong in reiterating a now 50-year U.S. policy called the island chain doctrine, and the 2025 national security strategy states very clearly that the United States will it is a policy of the United States to maintain military overmatch throughout the entire first island chain, and that the defense of Taiwan ultimately is part of the national vital interest of the United States. Now, of course, that allows ambiguity for when and under what conditions the US might enter. But I think that many people have underestimated that section to suggest that somehow the US has abdicated its foreign policy focus away from the Pacific and away from the South China Sea towards the Western Hemisphere. As I say, it's very clear. And the week after that, actually, the Secretary of War, Hegseth, actually called for greater military investment and support to maintain the first island chain. And of course, if you remember that when the Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi made a wave because she claimed that if China made a move on Taiwan, it would be considered a direct attack on Japanese sovereignty, and that relates to the Okinawa. And so I think that, and she got support from the United States. So all I'm trying to say here is I think that we should just focus that I think that, as far as the national security strategy is concerned, and the money that's being put in support of what it calls military overmatch, and it says in the security strategy that the U.S. will maintain freedom of navigation within the Taiwan Straits by any means necessary, including military force. Now, whether that is actually enforced or reneged, but I think that it's important that we see that as an important backdrop whenever there's a summit between Xi and Trump, because the Chinese know that this is the American foreign policy.
We're getting on in our debate here, so I want to change topics now. We could continue to talk about Taiwan for the rest of the show, but I don't want to run out of time to discuss Iran, because we're seeing Russian President Vladimir Putin now arriving in Beijing. And Iran is, of course, a key Russian and Chinese ally. They're a member of BRICS, excuse me, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is primarily a military and security organization based in Beijing. Now, despite words of support for a cessation of hostilities, China and Russia have refrained from supporting Iran in the same manner that perhaps you could argue the US and the European countries have supported Ukraine. So, Kian, why haven't we seen Russia and China be more open and demonstrative in their support of Iran, or, reversely, more willing to moderate a peace deal?
Well, as to your first question, I don't think we should underestimate the support that Russia and China are giving Iran. In fact, Russia, and I don't know what the exact volume of these exports are, but you know that the original Iran Shahed drone, which has caused so much havoc in the Gulf and also in Ukraine, that has been taken over by Russia. It's been repurposed and redesigned and made more advanced. And Russia is exporting those drones back to Iran. So that is a very important lifeline for blunting the U.S. ability to degrade Iran's military capacity over time. If Russia can keep resupplying Iran with important drones, which they then use to threaten ships in the Persian Gulf, that's an important support. China is also. We just heard yesterday that some Chinese ship was held up by Iranian IRGC, and that's an interesting development. But I think that what it shows is that China is obviously still very interested in maintaining its source of oil, even though it doesn't get a majority of its oil from Iran. It gets a majority of its oil from Saudi Arabia. But China's play is essentially to use the Middle East as much as possible as a lever to dislodge and to degrade and to weaken the United States. One could even see it as a proxy war, as I mentioned earlier. That is to say, everything that the U.S. has to spend, time, money, material, and so forth, in the Mideast theater is what the U.S. cannot use, or at least is compromised to use in Taiwan. And so, it is in the Chinese interest to maintain, Iran's resistance economy as much as it can, and that's why it's not doing anything to support the U.S. At the moment, of course, China is not able to support directly Iran, but it will in terms of anti-cruise missiles, which by some accounts have already arrived over the last few years in Iran, and those are very dangerous to American warships in the Gulf. And so I think we should not underestimate the extent to which behind the scenes Russia and China are doing two things. One is continuing their support through their military and digital and other kinds of infrastructure, and two, not doing anything to pressure Iran to compromise with the United States.
Mm. Sean, how do you see that assessment there? Is it in China's interest for the US to be bogged down in Iran? And is that the gamble that the Chinese leadership is making?
Well, I mean, I think the tension in Iran was started by the Americans in Israel. So I'm not sure why we're blaming China for the Americans and the Israelis getting embroiled in yet another endless war in the Middle East. But what I would say is I wouldn't overestimate or exaggerate the help or the closeness of China with Iran. I think there's a cartoon-like view of foreign affairs in the United States amongst the establishment, where they view that China is the puppet master of Iran or super close ally. I would actually say that China is close to Iran, and for that matter, Russia, as a matter of survival. When you have the pro-democracy ideologues who are clearly trying to contain China's rise, destabilize the CPC, and push for regime change, the CPC is waking up every day saying, we need to get close to Russia, we need to get close to Iran as a matter of survival, not because they're actually that close. When you look at it, China does about $108 billion of trade, not with Iran every year, but with Saudi Arabia, and $103 billion of trade with the UAE. Officially, they only do about $15 billion of trade with Iran. Probably the number goes up to 35 billion when you account for gray area unofficial oil. But when you look at it, the actual trade numbers between the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and China dwarfs by like 7-8 times the trade between China and Iran. So I would find it very hard to believe that China would be giving military equipment. They might be giving some satellite data to the Iranians because they don't want to hurt their allies who they might even be closer to with Saudi Arabia and the UAE. When you look at it, 3 weeks ago, the Crown Prince of the UAE, of Abu Dhabi, visited Chairman Xi in Beijing. You see that Saudi Arabia just opened up their second office for PIF, their international investing arm, in China 2 weeks ago. So relations between China and other countries in the Middle East is as strong, if not stronger than Iran. So I would hope that the establishment in the U.S. would sort of maybe get a better understanding and a less cartoon-like view of China. And it's great that Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State, finally visited China for the first time last week. I don't think any board of a Fortune 500 company would appoint a CEO or head of international without ever visiting China one time. But somehow Trump has done that with Marco Rubio. We have ignorant, uneducated people in charge in D.C., and it's hurting the whole world.
Carla?
If I may respond, thank you. First of all, Marco Rubio has turned out to be an incredibly capable Secretary of State, just to rebut that. And the second thing is that there are trucks and trains from China taking equipment into Iran, chemicals. They're also manufacturing some of those missiles in China on behalf of Iran. This is a fact. And President Trump, if you look at the idea that he said about this conflict having been started by Israel and the United States, that is patently false. 47 years ago, the Iranian mullahs took over and said death to America from the podium and the pulpit every single day. And when a country says death to you, you have to take it seriously. And that's why the threats by the Chinese leadership, we do take seriously. We're continuing a good relationship, but we're not
threats from the
stupid.
Chinese leadership? When did they ever say to blow up America? Con, you're getting very confused on facts here.
You're interrupting me again. It's very rude.
Yeah, because you're misinforming the public. You're misinforming people around the world.
Misinforming the public. There have been very pugnacious statements made by Chinese leadership. Yes, at the highest level.
If you're going to say that, please share it. I haven't seen it.
But the fact is that the suicidal, revolutionary, crazy mullah regime of Iran is an existential threat to the United States, but also to the region and the world. You can't let a group like that have a nuclear bomb or have these medium range warheads, which they're working on long range, which could even threaten the United States homeland. So this is a threat, and I'm proud that President Trump is working to defeat them and to defang them. And I wish that our NATO allies would be helping, since they rely more on the Strait of Hormuz by far than we do.
But they're not helping. So I thought you said that Marco Rubio and Donald Trump were the greatest negotiators and, policymakers in the history of the world. I mean, it's clear that the whole world doesn't like what's going on in Iran, except for the Israelis and the Americans. It's clear that Benjamin Netanyahu is finally getting what he's been trying to get the Clintons, the Bushes, the Obamas, the Bidens to do for 40 years. And we've now got egg on the face of the United States, which is hurting our prestige. We can't beat the Iranians. We can't get our allies in NATO to help. So we have really hurt American standing. It's shocking for Americans like me who live overseas to see what's happened in the last year to our standing.
Yeah, if I could jump in, a lot of my perspective is shaped by my particular experience as a former democracy and human rights activist inside Iran. I think some of your viewers before had known I was imprisoned by the IRGC in 2009. I was held in Evin prison for over a year for my political activism and for supporting and representing American organizations. I'm a dual Iranian American citizen, but I'm exiled from Iran currently. And then I was held under 6 years under house arrest until I was one of the 4 Iranian Americans that was released under the JCPOA. So I actually have a very complicated relationship with that earlier Iranian deal, because I wouldn't be free without it, but I have analytical problems with it. Let's put it that way. But let me just say, so that's the perspective in which I approach this, and to say that I think that for many, the majority of Iranians that oppose the regime inside Iran, and that I estimate at least 60% or 70% of Iranians oppose this regime and want to live under a free regime, integrated into the Western world, not necessarily, tied at the hip with the United States, but certainly not antagonistic with it. For most of those majority of Iranians, they feel what I have said in previous appearances, that I'm not here necessarily to support the war, because I'm a civil society activist, but I would say that I think analytically and historically, it's important to recognize, I don't think it's right to say that President Trump or Prime Minister Netanyahu started this war with Iran. I think they want to finish a war that Iran started 47 years ago in 1979, and that they've never ceased fighting, not against Israel, not against the United States, and not, more importantly for me, not against the majority of Iranian people who want to live under a different regime. So I think that to bring it to our conversation today, I think the relationship with China, that majority of Iranians will view this 25-year treaty or agreement that Iran had with China as taking Iran in the wrong direction, in the sense of joining what is becoming to be viewed as the axis of authoritarianism around the world. And most of those Iranians would prefer to be connected with the Western modern world. So I think that China plays a very important role, even for those Iranians inside Iran, because they see Iran being locked into a future, which I think for them, they feel reduces their life chances, lessen their life chances, both materially and also in terms of personal freedoms and a thriving life.
Carla, I want to pick up on a bit of what Kian's saying there. If Chinese firms, so President Trump says that that the Chinese leadership assured him that they haven't supplied weapons to Iran, but Chinese firms have supplied satellite imagery to assist the IRGC striking US forces in the Middle East. So how can Republicans happily sit and watch President Trump cozy up and play nice to China when China is working against them in Iran?
Well, it's a big world. President Trump represents all Americans, not just Republicans, for instance. And he's focused on ending this conflict. I would say he's the president of peace. He's not going to start any more forever wars, these sort of, wars that presidents would start, and we'd be stuck for 20 years trying to bring democracy to a place that isn't democratic, that has a different form of leadership, which is they have a right to have a different form. But what has happened in Iran, for instance, the Mullah regime and the IRGC have basically stolen hand over fist the wealth of that country, because Iran is a powerful, wealthy country. It has all this energy and it has very smart, educated young people, and they want prosperity. But what's happened is because of the theft of the money where they've enriched themselves, or they have funded the terror groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthi rebels, because of all of this, they haven't paid attention to infrastructure in Iran. Iran is collapsing, whether it's the water that people can't get, fresh water, or whether it's the non-investment. If you go to a strong energy country, even a smaller one like Azerbaijan, if the leadership invests the money, the proceeds from the energy into the infrastructure, you can see it, the people see it, the people feel it, and they have more opportunity for prosperity. What's happened in Iran is they haven't done that. And then they've oppressed the people with this medieval, oppressive regime, and the torment and torture and killing and even sexual torture of the people of Iran. It's truly evil. But that's not the reason that President Trump is in this conflict. It's a short-lived conflict. He is there because they are a threat to the United States because of their nuclear ambitions, the fact that they have enough nuclear material to make bombs right now, and the fact that they have these medium range missiles moving toward long-range missiles, the fact that they can hit Europe right now, the heart of Europe, or the UK, that is a threat. And so that's why, you see the Middle Eastern countries saying, pause, don't attack right now. We're working on a peace deal. But they are standing with us. It was shocking to me that the Iranian mullahs and the IRGC attacked their best friends. They attacked Oman when Oman was brokering those early talks. They attacked Qatar. These are not like non-friendly countries to Iran. Historically, they have a good relationship. So I think that the clock is ticking. I know the IRGC is not centralized. It's decentralized throughout Iran. But the United States has more cards to play. We can take the funds that they've squirreled away in bank accounts. We can certainly really choke off things getting out, not just through the strait, but the roads and the railroads. And then I think the pain will compel these. There's going to have to be enough pain to compel these mullah the leaders and the IRGC members to lay down their arms.
We're almost out of time, so I just want to pivot us back to how China weighs in on this with you to wrap us up, Sean. I'll ask you the same question that I put to Carla there. I mean, if we're seeing if we're seeing President Trump and Xi standing together talking about this historic moment and this wonderful relationship they have, how can China stand beside the US and say that when we know that China is supplying Iran with the information to strike not just US forces, but as you were talking about, the Middle East countries as well that apparently China has such a good relationship with?
Well, I think China wants to play all different sides and not get into military confrontation with any country. So it wants to have good relations with Iran, good relations with Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Qatar, but in the background push for peace, because it's clear the Chinese are focused not on warmongering, not on imperialism. I don't think when they become the most powerful nation in the world, they're going to be like the United States or Western Europeans and be sort of colonists. I think it's going to be a much more saner, more peaceful world if they were to be able to more of a tributary like state where China exerts power through trade. But I think at the end of the day, what's clear to me is that China wants good relations with the United States. And I think that's something that Americans really need to understand. China has felt betrayed over the last 8 years at the deterioration of US-China relations. When you look at it, most of China's leaders from the 1980s on, they sent their kids or their grandkids not to Russia or the Soviet Union to study, but to the United States. So you look at people like Deng Xiaoping, you know, his grandkids went to Duke. You look at Hu Yaobang, his grandkids went to Yale. And then even more modern era, Jiang Zemin, the former president, his grandson went to Harvard. And the current president, Xi Jinping, his daughter went to Harvard.
His daughter's a Harvard alumni.
Exactly. And so it's like, a lot of the elite in China feel confused and betrayed about what's happened in the last 8-9 years. They went to the top universities in America to learn best of American know-how, bring back that knowledge to China to help rebuild China's economy, do things like the Made in China 2025 plan, which is about improving the quality of life for Chinese by having better access to technology. How is that a bad thing? But somehow politicians are now demonizing these types of enrichment and R&D campaigns as evil and as a threat to the United States. So what I want viewers to know is that China, you know, you can't just look at things with all roses and flowers, right? Could they be a risk to the United States? Potentially. But you have to look at China more as a potential partner. Stop calling it an adversary. Call it as a strategic competitor. Cooperate where you can and have differences where you have elsewhere. And I'll use one final example to end it. You know, Australia had great relations with China before Scott Morrison became prime minister. And then relations got terrible and there was a lot of economic coercion slapped on Australia. The Australians slapped a lot of economic coercion on China. But then the new prime minister from Australia, Albanese, said, you know what, we need to do trade with China. They account for about 45% of our trade. We will disagree respectfully with China on areas that we disagree on with values or with feelings, but we're going to go and do it respectfully. I think if the United States started using that term with China, which I have to give credit for Trump for saying, then relations will be better and we'll all be better off.
Well, maybe on...
Sean, could I just say one thing? I
Very
think that
briefly,
what you're leaving out, I don't disagree with you, but what I think what you're leaving out is the agency of China itself. Why does China make other countries feel threatened? And it's because a lot of their trade practices were not transparent or fair and so forth. So I think that we should also include, the Chinese responsibility for some of the reactions that they faced.
It has been an interesting week in geopolitics, as it always is when we have President Trump and Xi on the same world stage. But we are out of time, so we will have to leave it there. But I appreciate all of your diverse opinions. Kian Tajbakhsh, Iranian-American scholar and professor of international relations at New York University. Carla Sands, vice president for energy and environment at the America First Policy Institute. And Sean Ryan, founder of the China Market Research Group. To all of you, thanks for being on Counterpoints. And thank you to you at home for tuning in to this episode. To keep up to date with our latest debates and interviews, you can, of course, catch us on Al Arabiya English on YouTube and follow us on X and TikTok. We'll see you next time.